because of his
So Kuntala
time.
Shabnam, please.
Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me, everyone?
Kuntala is fine.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're audible.
Okay. So welcome to the plenary session 2 with our first speaker, Dr. Rakib Chaudhry. Dr. Rakib Chaudhry is an academic in the Faculty of Education at Monash University. He taught in the Department of English, University of Dhaka from 1997 to 2004, and then joined the Monash Faculty of Education in 2009 upon completing his PhD in 2008. Dr. Rakib has published extensively in the areas of TESOL and ELT, culture and pedagogy, international education, social justice, and identity. His current research focuses on social justice issues in education, family language policies, as well as higher education policy reforms. His upcoming book is entitled The Privatization of Higher Education in Post-Colonial Bangladesh, The Politics of Intervention and
Control.
Politics of Intervention and Control will be published by Routledge in 2021. Originally from Dhaka, Dr. Rakib has been living in Australia with his family for more than 20 years. So I invite Dr. Rakib Chaudhry with his talk titled Knowing Thyself, the Pandemic as an Optimized Space for Metacognitive Learning for Graduate Researchers.
Thank you very much, Parama. I just wanted to make sure about two things. Are we meant to take a 5-minute break before the presentation, or do I start now?
I think Rakib Bhai, you can continue.
But I need to see you, Saeed. I can't see you. Where are you?
Oh, you want to see me? Okay, I'm here.
Yes, of course. All right, very good to see you. Okay, and yeah, so thanks everyone. I'd like to start by reminding everyone that I'm speaking from Melbourne, Australia, and it's 10:30 at night. It's very close to my bedtime, so if I yawn, please forgive me. I've got a very good excuse. It's 10:30. It's quite late at night, but no excuse for you guys. If you yawn, I would take that as a response that registers your your boredom. So yeah, better keep that in mind. I'd like to start by saying, by acknowledging and thanking the president of the TESOL Society of Bangladesh, Professor Saidur Rahman, for inviting me to present at the very first International Virtual Research Conference from the TESOL Society of Bangladesh. The convener of the conference, Dr. Tasnima Akhtar, who of course was the person behind the scenes making all of this happen, keeping track of the correspondence and everything. So thank you very much, Tasnima. Great to see you here. Mr. Hamidul Haq, the Vice President of TESOL Society of Bangladesh, and Poroma, of course, who introduced me. And the last time I saw Poroma was in my class at Dhaka University. That must have been 15 years ago. You were in your first year then, was it? Must have been.
Rakib Bhai, Poroma is like, she opted to moderate. She has a request that I want to moderate my teacher session. So
I'm very glad
we put her here.
Thank you, Poroma. I'm really glad to know that. I'd also like to acknowledge our keynote speaker, Professor Richard Smith. And it's a great pleasure and a great privilege to be here. So thank you very much for having me, Saeed and Tasnima and Poroma. Once again, thank you very much. Just before moving on, I'd like to draw your attention to the cover page itself. On the left, you can probably see the virus, the ubiquitous image of the coronavirus superimposed on the calendar. The hope is that in the coming months, the virus disappears gradually, fades away in the background, and the calendar becomes a bit more conspicuous, so that wishing everyone at the beginning a better 2021, a better next year. But the virus, the pandemic, is actually the context against which the presentation is located. The presentation is about metacognitive learning or metacognition, and I know that Tasnima herself has done some research on metacognition, and if I'm not wrong, her PhD is actually on metacognition. So it's not a new topic. There's plenty of research on metacognitive learning, metacognition itself, theoretically, empirical studies, all of that. Perhaps what is new about the presentation is the juxtaposition and the contextualization of metacognition and metacognitive learning in the situatedness of this global pandemic. So kind of metacognitive awareness and the role of the pandemic as one that can actually optimize and enhance metacognitive learning. That is what the presentation is about. And just to put a little bit of context, the presentation would focus on graduate researchers. And I believe most of you here are doing your master's or you've finished your master's. Some of you are probably doing your PhD. Others may have finished your PhD. Some of you certainly have done that and bring in a lot of experience. I'll start with a quote, and this is from my colleague, Professor Neil Selwyn from the Faculty of Education at Monash University. I'm just moving around the video on one side. I'll just read out just a little bit of this quote from, Neil is the author of the book, very interestingly titled, Should Robots Replace Teachers? AI, that's Artificial Intelligence, the Future of Education. So he says, I hope that one of the educational legacies of COVID-19 is more, I need to move this. I'm sorry about this. I'll just move the video pod. All right, here we are. Is a more realistic conversation about the limits of digital technology and education. And the past few years have seen growing enthusiasms for online education, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, these technologies definitely have their place, but now that everyone has first-hand experience of a mass shift to online learning, we should all be aware of the many practical problems that lie behind what he calls this hype of over-reliance on technology in the context of the pandemic. So the fact that we're using Zoom right now is fantastic. Where would we be without Zoom, right? But there are problems with that, and that's what I'll talk about. He continues saying there is something irreplaceable about students and teachers coming together to learn in person, you know, the physicality of the classroom. And who doesn't know that? Don't we miss the real classroom? I don't know how it is at the moment in Bangladesh, but the last time I had a lesson in a real classroom was in February, and that was in Brunei, at a university in Brunei. And, you know, it's been an entire year that I haven't been in a classroom. So Neil is really talking about technology and the need for it, but also kind of that skeptical, cautious kind of approach to technology. So these are two images that you'd probably be familiar with, unless if you were born in the last 10, 15 years, like my children. So these are the technologies that no longer have a place in our life. You know, we have a cassette tape, we have a floppy disk. When I was doing my studies in the Department of English at Dhaka University, I used to have a Walkman. I still have it. I don't play it. I don't need to play it. We didn't have floppy disks. We didn't need floppy disks. We went to Nilketh, or we went to the photocopier at the front of the arts building. We would borrow books from the seminar library, and Wahid Bhai would allow us to have them out of the library for no more than 2 hours, because, you know, we just had to return them. So you photocopy, you return, and that's all you have. No computers, no mobile phones. We never heard of floppy disks. When I came to study for my second master's at Monash University, 2000, floppy disks were amazing. 1.4 megabytes of space where you can save anything and you can just carry it with you in your pocket. By the time I went back to Monash for my master's, 4 years later, 2004, you know, floppy disks were gone. We had USB sticks. Fast forward another 4 or 5 years. Now no one uses USB disks either. I mean, you don't have to, because you have cloud storage, Google Drive, you know, Dropbox, whatever you call it. So this is all fantastic, and it just makes learning easier. It makes teaching easier. It makes doing research easier. But, you know, there is a problem here, because easier, does that really mean better? easier or more comfortable, does that actually make things more optimal for our learning? And to explain what's happening here, I'll just show you this image of 4 classrooms. So we have classrooms where there is a high challenge, or the tasks are difficult and low challenge. And then we have classrooms where the teacher has high support or scaffolding, if I use Brunner's term, and then low support. So if you look at the class on the bottom right, a classroom with low challenge and low support, this would be a boring class. There is no push to learn and there is little support from the teacher. So zone of boredom. This classroom here on the left, bottom left, low challenge, high support, it would be a zone of comfort because the teacher is giving you a lot more support than you actually need. Top right, high challenge, low support, zone of frustration. So we have zone of comfort, zone of boredom, zone of frustration. And then we have the 4th class, which is high support and high challenge. Tasks are very difficult, but you're also getting a lot of support from the teacher. This is the zone of proximal development, if I use Vygotsky. So the point I'm trying to make here is that technology is good. Don't take me wrong. We do need technology. I didn't realize we needed floppy disks when I was doing my master's. I only realized that when I was doing my 2nd master's, and then a USB when I was doing my PhD. But people before that, they did PhDs, they did masters, they didn't need the technology. So technology is good, but there is something of an issue when things become too easy, because what happens is when you lower the challenge and when we become more comfortable, that is when we don't learn as much as we could when the challenge is high. In other words, if I just want to summarize this part of the conversation, if there is little challenge, if we are too comfortable, we don't learn as much as we can when there is high challenge. So technology is good, but in some ways, technology makes us feel comfortable. Technology makes us feel complacent. We don't have to memorize things. We don't have to remember things because everything is just one click away. And that is a problem. And from my anecdotal observation of research that has been done in the last 7, 8, 9 months since the pandemic started, and the world started locking down all over continents and across countries, is that most of the research that was published during this time was focused on technology, optimizing technology, better use of technology. I've seen at least 5 articles written on Zoom itself, just the technology of Zoom and how to use it better and to integrate classes and to make them more inclusive and all of that. So there's too much emphasis on technology. And at the other end, we have, it's really about looking inside. Is technology really all? Of course it is. And you know that. There's nothing new about that. But what I'll be showing you is that in some ways, if anything, the pandemic has shown us is that there is a lot of value in trying to learn about ourselves in ways that are only possible during unprecedented times such as the pandemic. I have an entire paper written on the theories of metacognitive learning in the context of COVID-19, which is coming up in the next couple of months. But I will not go through a lot of the theories in this presentation. Instead, I will focus on 2 studies and talk about some of the experiences from my own PhD students, 3 of them actually, at Monash University. So today we are looking inside, not outside. So in other words, looking at how we learn, which is metacognition, rather than outside, which is technology, and what I call HOTS for HOTS. I'll come to that in a few slides. The less is more approach, and by more I mean being overwhelmed by technology, and by less means kind of being a bit off-grid, looking inside, introspection, which is really what metacognition is about. So that is what I'll be discussing about. So I'll go through the next couple of slides rather quickly because these are more theories and you can just read about them, and I will be sure to send Tasnima a copy of my published paper where all these theories are discussed. So metacognition literally means beyond cognition. So thinking about thinking, cognition about cognition, knowing about knowing. So it's kind of, it is reflective in some way. It is kind of looking inside, it is kind of self-critique, but it is also a study of memory monitoring. It's about looking at how your own memory works, and that ties us to the other dimension of metacognition, which is metacognitive regulation. So you have metacognitive knowledge, which is to know how you learn. But the second is metacognitive regulation, which is about what you do about your knowledge of how you learn. And between this knowing and this doing, there is a discontinuity sometimes. Sometimes we know how we learn, but we don't do anything to optimize that. Sometimes we know how we don't learn, and we don't do anything to prevent that. So, you know, that discontinuity between the knowing and doing is what we need to sort of make more alignment between, just for better learning and teaching outcomes. SLR, or self-regulated learning, is another aspect very closely tied to metacognition. And it's about monitoring your own comprehension, understanding, and assessment of your own abilities without external help. So that could be teacher, that could be a peer, that could be your parents in case of young learners, etc. But perhaps most importantly, metacognition and self-regulated learning provides us with an opportunity for self-assessment. Now, we are familiar with two types of assessment of learning, or the summative assessment, which is formal, which is institutional, which is sort of, it comes in the form of a grade. It's usually quantifiable. It's usually in the form of a report. It's usually at the end of a term. So all these formal assessment that we have, summative assessment. Assessment for learning is the more informal one, is the ongoing one, is the one where we try to understand what our students are learning, what they're not learning, what their difficulties are. So this is the informal one. But there is a third type of assessment, and that is assessment or self-assessment as learning, where the learning and the assessment are inseparable, and that's where metacognition comes in. So the argument I'm trying to make in this presentation is that although we all have metacognitive knowledge, perhaps when it comes to regulation of our behavior to optimize and calibrate our metacognitive abilities, we probably don't do as much as we could. And so I'm saying metacognition works best if it is deliberate, purposive, and systematic, rather than intuitive and unconscious, or something that we don't really pay much attention to. And it can be represented in a cycle, which starts with experiencing. And when I'm talking about experiences, I'm talking about experiencing what we learn, how we don't learn, what helps us learn, what doesn't help us learn. So that's experiencing all of that in formal spaces, in informal spaces, out of school, etc. And then reflection, followed by formalizing. This is the tricky part. So this is where we actually do something about it, and then deciding how to incorporate improvements, and then it goes on and on and on. So that's the cycle that metacognition involves. How do we do that? A process in which a person actively searches for relationships and patterns to resolve contradictions or to bring coherence out of a set of experiences of teaching and learning. So it's really looking at patterns of how you work best and what things work for you, what things don't work for you. So it's kind of part psychology, it's part pedagogy, self-assessment, it's part reflection, introspection, all of these things bound together. As a result of this, we self-create a learning environment that supports the development of metacognitive skills. So think about COVID-19, think about the closure of schools, think about learning at home, think about yourself, perhaps your children if you have any. Think about what you've been doing the last 6 or 7 months. You know, the physicality of your environment was different. The resources available to you were different. The logistics were different. Did we just try to fit with all that we had around us? Or did we actually make adjustments to our own ways to interact with, you know, the affordances all around us? So we all do it already to different degrees, but do we really do? So I'll ask you a series of questions to think about. I'd like you to consider these statements and try to see whether some of these relate to you. So the first one, I learn or I study or I read or I write best when I have coffee, right? What do you think? Some of you would probably be able to relate with that. You need your cup of coffee, just like I have mine here. Or I learn best when I'm not chatting on Facebook Messenger. That's probably obvious. I learn best when I'm listening to soft music or late at night or in comfortable weather or when it's quiet or when I have music in my background. Or I learn best when I read an article twice, highlight text using different colors, take notes, underline quotes to use in my writing, right? So if you think about it, we already have that metacognitive awareness or the knowledge. The next thing to do is to have metacognitive regulation. And that is what I'm saying needs to be deliberate and systematic rather than intuitive and habitual or subconscious. Why do we need metacognitive learning? Because it shapes active rather than passive learners. It gives learners sense of control over learning. So, it's really about empowerment. It's about your own ability, your sense of what you're able to do. It promotes deep learning, and we'll look at that probably in the next slide. And it promotes HOTS, and that's the first HOTS in the four HOTS model that I'm going to talk about. So we're talking about higher order thinking skills as opposed to lower order thinking skills. And some of you would be familiar, I'm sure most of you would be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, the original one and the revised one. So you have the lower order thinking skills all the way up to level 6. We have creating, which is the highest level of cognitive ability. And I know there are critics of Bloom's taxonomy. It is not precise science, but then again, within the context of social sciences and cognitive behaviorism, this is one way of looking at the hierarchy of cognition. So HOTS or higher order thinking skills are the need for learners to go beyond the mere recall of factual information. So just remembering, which is the low level, to develop a deeper understanding of topics, to be more critical about evidence, to solve problems, to think flexibly, to make reasoned judgments and decisions, etc. So from the lower order to the higher order. So this is the second HOTS, the higher order thinking students. So I'm talking about graduate students. Think about, generally speaking, a student at primary school, and then at high school, and then undergraduate, and then doing a graduate degree like a master's degree, and then following on to perhaps a PhD or an MPhil. Generally speaking, regardless of the topic, there are ways in which cognition develops. And I'm not talking about in a very psycholinguistic or psychological way, but even if you think about the tasks that we are meant to do, description is probably easier than comparison. And then comparison is easier than critical reflection. And then creating something is even more difficult. So that's the hierarchy. That's the Bloom's taxonomy of order. So when we talk about higher order thinking skills and we talk about higher order thinking students, perhaps there is an alignment. So if you look at what Perkins shows from the tacit learner to the aware learner, to the strategic learner, to the reflective learner, you can probably show a correspondence between learners from primary school to high school going on to university and graduate studies and all of that. At the graduate level, you're expected to be critical and reflective and creative to a degree perhaps that is much higher than what you would be expected to do at the undergraduate level or at the university level. So keeping with that hierarchy of cognitive development, it is the cultivation of higher order thinking skills that the higher order thinking students need to develop, and metacognition, as opposed to reliance on technology, is an approach that I'm asking you to consider. So we look at 2 studies, and then I'll talk about my students, and I'll be done. Paroma, tell me when I have about 10 minutes. And I have less than 10 minutes.
You are left with 5 minutes.
Oh my God. I better rush. Okay, it's your fault, Paroma. You didn't tell me.
Paroma didn't tell you, but I send you a message. Chat box.
Who's looking at messages? I'm just reading from the slide. Anyway, thank you. I'll try to be quick. So two studies. The first one, the first one is about use of metacognitive strategies, but by Chinese PhD students. A longitudinal study involving 6 Chinese PhD students in Australia. These are the findings. Sorry for rushing through the slides, but I'll probably just go very quickly. If you look at that red font in the middle, it says metacognitive strategies are universal in nature. So it's not something that is distinctive with Bangladeshis as opposed to Australians. This being an Australian study of Chinese, etc. It's all the same. But the recommendation is that supervisors are an important source of strategies by the simple fact that they are more sort of in a position where they're intellectually at least expected to be more sort of advanced than their students. The second study is a large quantitative survey-based study of more than 2,000 PhD students in Australia again. And these are some of the findings. And if you look at that red font here, just because we don't have enough time, intuitive metacognition is not always helpful. So if you think you are metacognitively aware, you might actually be deeply flawed, or you can only be partly appropriate. And there are 3 dimensions that the study recommends every learner to look at. Some of the quotes from the second study are those of frustration and messages where PhD students are talking about giving up and sort of feeling depressed and isolated, lacking motivation, disappointment, depression, anxiety, etc., etc. But on the other hand, some of the students also said that the metacognition that they could develop through their PhD studies also enabled them to become more independent thinkers. And the last quote here is from a participant who said, I actually am enjoying it so much. I don't want to ever finish my PhD. I just want it to be going. I'm just enjoying it. So just mixed bag of feelings. Views of supervisors, once again, I'll skip this, but the role again is also for the supervisor to do something. So here is the last part of my presentation. And Poroma, if you can give me 3 or 4 minutes, I promise I'll finish. At the moment, I'm supervising 8 PhD students, and it's a mix of local and international students, but probably significantly for this presentation, 2 of them are actively collecting data in this global pandemic. And they are both in Australia, and they are both collecting data outside Australia. And in one case, they actually started collecting data right before the travel restrictions. So they were all stuck in Australia, and they had to make adjustments for their data collection. These are stories from three PhD students. Here's the first one. She also sent me a photo of the parsley growing in her backyard. And she's talking about all these social realities around her. That was once an annoyance, but she learned to use that as positive sources of energy to draw on and to change her ways of thinking and writing and go through that period of isolation. I'm just going very quickly because you'll probably kick me out anyway. So here's the second one. My second PhD student was stuck in China. When she even started, she couldn't come here. And, you know, just the fact that there was an absence of the academic community around her made her feel isolated, and she was frustrated. She wanted to give her. If you look at some of these quotes here, the one here, I found academic research is looking at one drop of water in an endless ocean, and then I recognized that the world is much bigger than I thought, etc., etc. So again, period of frustration. Third student from Indonesia, she also sent me this image, and she said that image says it all. She even gave a title to her reflection, "The Unknown Unlocked." And they said there are literally millions of ways that a PhD project can go south. In normal times, whenever I lost my focus, I turned to my left and there's a colleague busy with their report, or to my right where a colleague was typing a manuscript. But at home, I did not feel this spirit, she says. So here is a fourth PhD student. This is a PhD student who hates his PhD. And in this case, I can reveal the student's name because I have permission. That is me a year before I submitted my PhD thesis. And I'm saying I hate PhD. And this is just an image. It was staged, of course. I asked my office mate to capture this image. It is staged, but it represents exactly how I felt a year before I submitted my PhD, because it was an impossible task and I was almost giving up. So now that I've finished, it's easy to tell you about all these theories and all of that, and even metacognition and all of that. But there is no pretending. There is no way of denying that we all go through such phases. And the best way of learning is not relying on technology, but actually looking inside. So where to go, just wrapping up here. So being metacognitively aware in a deliberate and systematic way, not in an intuitive way, getting out of the comfort zone, because if you look at Mariani's quadrant, too much comfort, too much ease, whether it comes from technology or air conditioner, is not a good thing. It's actually good to push ourselves, and that probably makes us do our best. Again, Vygotskian zone of proximal development, try something new, etc. And you're better than you think, but if you don't do some of these, you will never know it. And just to wrap up, the last two sentences from my article that I said I would share with Tasneem, I'll just read it out and that's it. Perhaps then it is time for us to move away from an over-reliance on technology during these isolating times. Perhaps it is wiser to explore deeply into ways in which we learn best. Perhaps the best use we can make of these times is by resorting to what had worked best for us before technology took over, by looking into and questioning our own practices and ways of learning. Perhaps the best way to learn is by unlearning what we've learned and by learning how to learn anew. Thank you, and sorry for taking too much time. Thank you, Parama.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for your wonderful presentation. Now we should proceed to the question answer session. I think we have to make it a little short. So questions, please. We are welcoming questions at this point.
I have just one question to Rakib Bhai on a very personal note. So you mentioned, was it in 2007 you wrote, I hated PhD?
Yeah, that's right. And it's a coincidence, Saeed, but it was on the exact day 11th of September 2007, which was exactly a year before I submitted, which was 2008, 11 September.
Now,
Yes.
how's your experience supervising the PhDs now? You hated as a student, now you supervise. So do you hate supervising or?
Not at all. In fact, I often tell my supervisees that I learn from them almost as much as they say they learn from me. And I think any supervisor would be able to agree with that, including yourself, Saeed, because there's so much to learn. And we're not just talking about theories, but about life and learning and cultures and histories, and of course, theories and studies and all of that. But I think one of the benefits that supervisors have, in a way that is unavoidable, is that we've already done one PhD and our students haven't. So it's an advantage, but also a privilege. But it's a privilege not in a way because we know how they feel, because that saying that would be patronizing, but rather saying that we can empathize with them, and perhaps we can feel how they feel without them verbalizing, without them telling us, because we've been there as well. And as much as we might pretend everything went well, I don't feel ashamed to say I once thought I hate PhD, and I'm fine with that.
Okay, questions, please. Kuntala, Shabnam, anybody?
Yeah, I think I have a quick question for you, sir. Since I'm also doing my graduate studies, postgraduate studies actually, currently. So initially it was a good feeling during the pandemic that we are studying from home. It's better and we don't have to wake up early and stuff like that. But at a certain point, I mean, the feeling came like, okay, how long are we going to get stuck at home? I mean, this feeling is kind of claustrophobic, and we also kind of missed the peer pressure that we used to get in our office working together.
Yeah.
So how do you evaluate that feeling?
Yeah, Poroma, that's actually a very good question. And as I just said a little while ago, I do understand what you're saying. I've been through that. I'm not pretending everything was fine with me. I've been through all of that, and that is natural. I think I'll just say that once again, that and I see that as a life philosophy, Poroma, not just about studies. As a person, I believe, and I've tried to imbibe that kind of value to my children who are now adults, that comfort isn't good, luxury isn't good, being idle isn't good. If you want to do better, and I'm not, I mean, we are teachers here, we are academics, so when we say doing better, it means publishing more, teaching better, etc., doing a PhD, etc. But that applies to everyone, even outside academia. If you want to do well, if you want to be more productive, it's good to get out of your comfort zone, sort of almost deliberately choose to be less comfortable or feel a bit of a discomfort, and shun kind of luxury or whatever is easier, and that would probably bring out parts of you that otherwise wouldn't. So Parama, going through that, as you said, claustrophobic and suffocating environment that forced us to stay inside, and there's no peer pressure, all of that. Is it possible, and I'm not offering a magic solution, but is it possible to actually see that as an incentive for you to reinvent yourself? I know I'm being vague because I'm not telling you exactly what to do, or to see it as a challenge and to say, all right, things that I can't do simply because I'm killing 3 hours of my day commuting to the university and back, I now have 3 hours extra. So what I'll do is I'll wake up late. I don't have to wear my lipstick and makeup for others to see me. And I will use that extra time either to study or to do something that I can't do normally. So it is actually possible to see something good out of all the impositions that were sort of put on us by the pandemic. So it's about, I'm talking a bit philosophically rather than pragmatically, but again, it's really about metacognition. If I ask you, what have you learned about yourself during the pandemic, I'm sure we will all be able to say something. But the point is, are we doing something about further enhancing what we discovered within us that can be powerful? So that's sort of how I would respond to your question, Paroma. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Any other questions?
The question, just appreciation, is like, after working on metacognition for 5 years, it's really wonderful to listen on metacognition and from you. And especially, I haven't thought about researchers' metacognition. It was mine was listeners' metacognition. So it's really wonderful to listen about researchers' metacognition, even teachers maybe.
Thank you, Dasnima. I'm really glad to know that, because I went through your publication list, I think this morning, and I was
thank you.
You see that I had actually chosen a topic that is actually, you're the expert in it. It's really not my area. It's that I haven't written about it until this new. So, maybe sometime we'll catch up and write something together, but thank you, Dasnima.
Thank you so much for, for the offer, sir. I'm glad.
Dr. Chaudhary, I just wanted to make a comment. Your wonderful presentation. I learned a lot of stuff. And interestingly, exactly this time last year, I was in your city right now. So it's very good to hear that you're from Melbourne. And thank you for having your coffee. And I think you didn't need to keep us awake. We were really enjoying it. Just quickly, one observation that I had, one comment that I wanted to make was that, like you were talking about all your PhD students, and obviously all of us who are faculty, all of us who are here right now, we are actually being more than teachers. We are actually not only sharing about our own experiences, our own frustrations, like you talked about hating PhD, because of various reasons, because of the, only when we have gone through that phase in our life, can we understand why our students, young men, young women, because men have their own issues, women have their own issues, the kind of pressure, because everybody does not understand what goes into, why is your PhD taking so much of time? So one thing is that as faculty right now, during this entire pandemic, while our students were wherever they were, they could not, maybe even if they were trying, they were not able to, get access through the, through their informants, the participant, whoever they were having to interview. So one of the things that I made them do is I told them, looking at the 21st century life skills, think out of the box, be creative, exactly like how you were talking about. I told them, even if you can't do research in your main topic, look at something which is connected to your topic. Look at something, how you can help your environment, your people. Even if you're in Uttarakhand, you're in a remote area, maybe in your own language, you could teach them about how to, get out of this, how to take care of themselves during this entire COVID situation. So these small little things.
Sandesha,
Yes.
I think we need to stop here.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah.
We need to stop here.
I'd just like to very quickly, Sandesha, I'd really like to thank you, and just like to say, I'm sure your students are privileged to have someone like you who's thinking, encouraging them to think outside the box. But thank you so much. I'm sure we'll catch up sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, sir. And we have a certificate for you on behalf of TESOL Society of Bangladesh. And while the certificate is being shown, I'd like to make just one comment on your session. You were talking about using less technology. This is something, the status of the English education in academia is always questioned that, okay, is it, relevant enough? We're always thinking that, okay, is English relevant enough? I always feel that, yes, we get plethora of technology every day. It's coming and coming and coming, but how do we consume it? That is something we need to learn through this kind of education, which English can provide. So thank you, sir. It was a wonderful opportunity.
Deepthi, thank you so much. And I just wanted to say, don't get me wrong, anyone. I'm not saying technology isn't good or whatever. I have my mobile phone right in front of me and all of that. But over-reliance isn't a good thing, as Deepthi has pointed out. And it's good, but it makes us comfortable. It's for anything, we have Wikipedia and Google, so we don't have to remember anything. And that comfort actually blunts us. It doesn't make us do as